Distribution centers trust PickerPal for passive fall protection that simply works. Over 60,000 of their patent-pending self-closing arms are in distribution facilities nationwide, securing pick module edges automatically as product is removed from pallets. No more missed chains or open gates. We don't like that. Learn more at pickerpalproducts.com and protect your team the smarter way. That's pickerpalproducts.com. Protect your team today.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I am going to be joined by Dale Walsh, and he is the VP of Strategy and Innovation at Roboworx, and they are focused on making sure that robotics fleets are being properly maintained, serviced, doing preventative maintenance, and making sure that they are operating for the long term, which is very critical. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today, what that means, and also how they operate and how they partner with OEMs to make sure that longevity of those fleets is being complete and is lasting for a long time, which creates longer value, I think, for lots of those end users too as well. So, Dale, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thanks for having me, Kevin. Doing great. Looking
Definitely.
forward to our chat today.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for joining. I know it was your birthday, right, recently. So happy birthday, we'll say here on the podcast, and joining us on a nice trip here that you're on. I'm jealous myself, I will say, for sure. But it's great to get you on, and definitely looking forward to learning more about Roboworx. So why don't we kick it off here? Tell us, give us kind of like a brief overview of what is Roboworx.
Sure, absolutely. So Roboworx is a robotic support company, and we help robot companies scale by providing field services for their robots.
Mm.
Now that field services includes everything from installation and in some cases pre-installation services like site surveys and things like that. But then also the actual physical installation of the robots. We focus heavily on preventative maintenance once the robots are installed and up and running, and also customer success. I'll come back to that in just a second.
Okay.
And of course, we repair them when they break. But we focus heavily on that middle part, which is preventative maintenance and customer success. And by customer success, what we mean is making sure that the end customer, the guy who's actually writing the check for the robots,
Mm.
gets the value that they were expecting out of that investment in robot technology.
Gotcha. Okay. And yeah, I think that, certainly an important aspect, right? And I think from, touching at those different points, whether it's the pre-installation, like you mentioned, or, the deployment and the customer success after the deployment and installation, you're certainly, I'm sure, seeing a lot of different angles of the industry, right? And how that's coming into play. So tell us a little bit about kind of what is your view on kind of warehouse robotics in the market right now?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct, because we do have kind of a unique perspective because we work with so many different robot companies who are supporting so many different verticals.
Mhm.
So warehouses are one of those verticals: warehouses, distribution centers, fulfillment centers. That's one area that we work in, but we also work in, the restaurant space. We work in
Okay.
hotels, casinos, airports. Most of what we do today are AMRs, but not all. We do a lot of fixed robots as well, particularly in the food service space, which is a rapidly growing space for us with food automation. So
Mhm.
we work with a lot of different robot manufacturers in a lot of different environments. And Specifically in the warehouse space, it's definitely a fast growing, fast evolving space. And we see, the adoption of robots continue to expand and excel in that space. It's been interesting. I've been in support for a long time and in robot support for over a decade, and seeing the way things have evolved, especially when you start thinking about shows like, Modex and
Mhm.
ProMath that are heavily focused into that warehouse distribution center space, and seeing how how much robotics has become a key part of those shows, is has been great to see over time. So
Mm.
it's a great space, one that we're happy to be a part of and help support robotic companies and help them scale to support their end customers in the warehouse space.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting. And talk to us a little bit about that, like, because you mentioned that helping them to scale, right? So
Yep.
you as a company, you're not necessarily, I guess, working with or the end user is not really like your customer, right? The OEM is more your customer. Is that correct?
Y- Yeah, exactly. So not typically, although we never say no, but
Sure, business is business, right?
if the end customer's big enough,
Yeah.
absolutely. So, but yeah, typically our customer, our partner is either an OEM, an integrator, or a reseller of robotics,
Mm.
and we work with all three. Most often, probably the OEMs are typically who we work with, who are the manufacturing the robot, and we become a part of their sort of a service organization, or in some cases, we become their entire service organization,
Mm.
depending on what their needs are. With the integrators, a lot of the integrators are really software companies, right? And they're pulling together their software with a lot of different hardware to make a complete solution. So oftentimes they don't have the resources to handle the electromechanical maintenance side. They're great at the software support side,
Hmm.
and they do a great job of that. But when it comes to the boots on the ground, keeping the hardware running, that's not necessarily their specialty. So oftentimes we'll work with those integrators to support the solution that they put into place for, like I said, from a boots on the ground. Same thing from a reseller. Oftentimes they don't have the infrastructure, or they may be a regional player. They have, maybe they're based in New York and they cover the Northeast, but you know, they're selling into customers who have warehouses all across the country, so they need somebody to supplement them outside of the area where they have a strong support geographically. So we work in a lot of different ways. It's a very bespoke business, which is one of the fun things about it, is we're not trying to cram people into certain predefined boxes. We're able to create
Mm.
custom solutions depending on what it is that they need. And we work in both a shared support model, which is where our technicians work on their robots, but we work on a lot of different robots as well. Those same technicians work on a lot of different robots, but they all we do is robots. So we're focused heavily in the robot space. But they may work on an AMR in a warehouse, and then they may work on a food service robot in a chain of restaurants.
Mm. Okay.
Um, and so that's the shared services model. We also do a dedicated model, where it's just where we place technicians on site to take care of the robots on a daily basis. So they go to that warehouse every day. They're there to take care of the robots, do preventative maintenance on the robots, be there for interdictions or any repairs that need to be made right on site, because they're there on a daily basis. So we work in a couple different models. The second model, the shared services model, is actually quite popular in the warehouse space, because you may have 400 robots or more under one roof. So every day you're taking a few of those robots out of the operation to do preventative maintenance on them.
Mm.
And then, like I said, once you've built that automation and you've built the dependency on the automation, then obviously uptime has become super critical. And so having on-site technicians to be there to address any issues that come up is very helpful in that space where it's so business critical to maintain that uptime.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting because, like you said earlier there about sometimes their expertise is on like the software side, right? And software is driving so much of what, the robot's actual capabilities can be. But I also think that, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. Like, I think that, there's so many startups, right, in the space too. Is like,
Yeah.
well, do they even have the resources to build out a full on service offering, right, and be able to support that in some way? And if we think about the warehousing industry, like traditionally, right, I think, operators are used to like, oh, well, I have a forklift and there's a forklift tech that comes out and services my forklifts, right? Or there's somebody that comes out and they take care of my rack if there's a damage, right? Or something like that. So they're used to like those service models being in place. So, dealing with a newer company or a startup or something like that, and they're probably looking for that reassurance that there is some kind of service there. So how does that, I guess, how do you work with the OEM, and then how does that end up translating down to the end user to be able to drive further value for them?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Are you asking the question, where's my stuff, too often? Whether it's in your own warehouses, from your suppliers, or in your customer network, if you're not sure where your stuff is, then SurgeAir has the solution for you. With SurgeAir's 99.9% accuracy, you're getting more than just supply chain visibility. You're getting the ability to orchestrate your supply chain and guide decisions in real time. Reduce the chaos in your supply chain and find operational truth with SurgeAir. Find your visibility and learn more at surgeair.com. That's surgeair.com.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because and we work with different companies in different ways depending on the size of the company and the the type of service organization they may or may not already have. So for instance, with a startup, as you just mentioned, oftentimes we become their primary service arm,
Mm.
because they do have limited resources, and they've got their they're working off investment money typically, and their investors want to see them use that money for marketing and sales and research and design and product development, and build, not hiring hourly technicians to work out in the field, right? That's probably
Mm.
not the good use of their investment money. So we'll partner with them to take over those functions. It's a big country, right? This is a big geography,
Yeah.
and it's hard to know exactly where your customers are going to be. So where do you hire technicians if you don't know where your customers are going to be? You end
Mm.
up then, flying people all over the country, and that's really not sustainable. Or you take your engineers, that are working on product development, and have to pull them off their job to go send them to do a repair somewhere, to get a customer back up and running. That's not scalable. So that's why I say we really help those companies scale, by helping take that burden of the service component, the maintenance, which we feel is extremely critical, the preventative maintenance, as well as the repairs. Take that burden off of them to let
Mm.
them focus on what they do best, which is designing and marketing their product. Now, with a lot of larger OEMs, we often will work as a supplement. We'll fill in gaps, or we'll do things that tend to sometimes fall through the cracks for them, like preventative maintenance. Oftentimes, they're very good at doing implementations. They're pretty good at doing repairs, but the preventative maintenance either falls through the cracks, it just doesn't get done, or they expect the end customer to do the preventative maintenance, which oftentimes doesn't get done as well. There's always some other priority that comes up instead of the preventative maintenance. So oftentimes we'll work with those larger OEMs to supplement their existing workforce to do things like preventative maintenance for them.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I think that it's such a interesting thing to think about. And I think back, I had an experience where I was working for a company, and they went for automation, and I was their inventory control manager, and they put in like a fully automated shuttle system with goods person picking stations and all this stuff, and they never really thought about the maintenance part in their their plan, and then all of a sudden they were shocked when, you know, they were advised by the person that installed it that, hey, like, you know, you need to hire like a full-time maintenance person to do this. So tell us a little bit about, you know, when people are just starting to look at robotics or automation and things like that, you know, how can they, I guess, rightfully plan, whether it's, you know, through the OEM or somebody on site with them? How do they include that in their planning from a service and preventative kind of maintenance perspective?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And your experience is not unique.
Yeah.
That's, I guess, maybe been one of the surprises isn't the right word, but it's one of the issues that we've had to deal with over time. You would think anybody who's driven a car or owned a car would realize that you've got to do preventative maintenance on that car, right?
Yeah.
If you don't change the oil,
Yeah.
guess what? At some point, that's going to catch up with you, right? If you're not rotating the tires, if you're not having your brakes checked, if you're not, doing those things to maintain it, it's not going to work at its peak performance. Well, robots are no different, but there seems to be maybe a different mindset about robots for some reason that people don't think about the maintenance side.
Mm.
So a big part of our job has been educating the market that you do need to think about maintenance. You do need to be prepared for that, and educating on the value of preventive maintenance. Most people realize at some point something's going to happen and it's going to break or it's going to get damaged. Forklift's going to run into it, whatever. Most people realize that it's going to need to be repaired at some point. What they don't think about is the preventative maintenance side, and that's really critical to maintaining the uptime, especially like I mentioned earlier in these business critical applications where they've created their staffing model around the automation working. Right, you don't have as many workers in the warehouse because you have more automation, which is great from an ROI standpoint, but the automation needs to be working for that
Mm.
ROI to continue. And so it's really critical to keep those robots maintained and make sure that they're also being adapted to the environment. Because these environments do change, right?
Yeah.
They're dynamic environments, right? Warehouses change based on who their customers, or maybe you're a 3PL and you've got new customers coming in, going out, and the environment changes. And if the robots aren't being adapted to the environment, human nature is just get the job done.
Yeah.
If that means hopping on a forklift and going and doing it instead of sending the robot to do it because the robot hasn't been updated to the changes, the new shelves that went in, or the new pick and place area, or pick and pack, or the new reconfiguration of certain part of the warehouse for a new customer. If the robot hasn't been adapted to that, you still got to get the job done. So next thing you know, human nature being what it is, we're going to get the job done manually, and they don't always pick up the phone to call the OEM and say, hey, we need to have the robots reconfigured, or this isn't working for us anymore. And that's where we come in by doing those regular on-site visits. We're not only, and this is the customer success part that I talked about earlier, we're not only making sure the robot's working electromechanically like it's supposed to, but also that it's actually doing the job they need it to do in the way that they need it to do. And we're adapting those robots to that ever-changing environment, whether that's a warehouse or a restaurant or a hotel, whatever it is, making sure that the robots are being adapted to that dynamic environment.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, because you mentioned like 3PLs, for example. I think that's a great example, right, or use case of that, because you do have clients that change, right, and you don't necessarily you have like some control, but not full control, right? Maybe you have a client, right, and then all of a sudden they decide, we've been doing apparel, and now we want to do suitcases, right? And that's totally different from like a T-shirt, right? So, you have to be able to kind of adopt to those things. And it's a great point that, human nature is like, well, we're just going to get it done, and, we'll just work around the robot, or we'll figure out some workaround, where really you should spend the time to do that adoption.
Yeah, we actually, a great example of that. This is in the restaurant space, but I think it still applies.
Sure.
We took over a fleet of robots that didn't have PM on them previously,
Mm.
and we showed up at a location. This one happened to be like a high-end movie theater restaurant combination kind of thing. And one of the robots is in the lobby with a sign hung on it that says "on strike." So, so when you walk in the lobby of the restaurant, or the movie theater, there's this robot with a
Yeah.
sign on it, "on strike." They'd never called the manufacturer to say there was a problem. They
Mm.
just stopped using it. And
Yeah.
not only that, they put the sign on it in the lobby. It was a simple firmware issue.
Mm.
No, nothing really electromechanically wrong with the robot. So it took our technician no time to get it back up and running. But that's just a great example of how human nature will take back over. And
Yeah.
just like I said, they'll go back to doing it the way they've always done it if the robot isn't being adapted to the environment and being maintained. And so that's really why we focus so heavily on that space.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, because I mean, that's even a great example too, where, I'm sure, like at that individual theater level, right? Like the decision was probably not made to put a robot there. It was probably at the
Exactly.
corporate level, and the corporate's not coming to the theater, and then all of a sudden, a couple months later, they're like, "Oh, how's it working out with that robot?" And they're like, "Oh, that thing hasn't worked in 4 months," right? And corporate's like,
Right, exactly.
"What?"
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Plus, there's
Interesting.
turnover, right?
Yeah.
That's a lot of times why they get the robots in the first place, is because they're high turnover environments. Warehouses certainly are high turnover environments, right?
Yeah.
And so, maybe the people who were part of that decision are gone, or people who were originally trained on it are long gone. And that doesn't always trickle down to the new hires. So part of what we do too is that constant retraining and making sure that we're keeping the staff trained, the current staff trained on the robots, as well as there is turnover.
Mm. Interesting. That's a great point too. And so I'm curious now, because you're seeing from the service level, you're obviously seeing, when robots are not working, and you're repairing them, or you're doing preventative maintenance, and you're trying to increase the longevity through service and things like that. I mean, are you seeing in any cases now, because I think we've had robots out in the field, I think, long enough now at a larger scale, where we could potentially see some of these robots maybe reaching end of life? And are you seeing that? And when that happens, like, what's being done about that?
Yeah, you're right that time is coming,
Mm.
and we've been preparing for that. So we actually have a partner that we work with. We've sourced a partner
Okay.
for refurbishment of robots.
Oh, interesting.
So it is something that we certainly are looking at to be able to provide as a service as well. Because you're right, they do come to end of the life, and they're really, unlike a lot of different industrial technologies, there's really not a secondary market
Mm.
yet for especially AMRs. Right now, there is a secondary market for heavier duty industrial robots and things like that, but not really for AMRs that we've seen develop yet. So there will become a time, we feel, when those robots do need to come out of the field. And a few things can happen. One, we need to harvest good parts out of them, especially if there's generations of robots, right? And you're pulling that first generation out of the field. There's good parts in those. So we need to harvest those parts, that we can use those parts to keep other first generation robots running. So that's one part of it. Another part of it is refurbishing those robots. What can these be refurbished? Can they be updated? Maybe they need a new LiDAR. Maybe they need some new sensors. Maybe they need new motors. Maybe they need to be repainted, or frame up kind of restoration, so to speak, on the robot. So we have a partner that can do all of those things to get a robot ready. And then whatever's left over needs to be recycled in the most environmentally
Mm.
friendly way possible. with the with what can't be recycled. So if we harvest all the parts out of it, how can we recycle the leftover components of that in a correct way?
Interesting, interesting. Yeah, yeah. I was curious about that because we are, kind of getting to that point, right, where robots have been out there in the field for a little while, and now they may be reaching that. It's interesting. You said like, there's not really necessarily a secondary market at this point, and that's probably because there hasn't really been enough secondary inventory to even like create a secondary market in some sense, right?
Yeah, I think there's two things, right? You're right. It's not mature enough yet,
Yeah.
but there's also you can't just most of these robots are phoning home, right? They're
Mm,
talking to some central control system.
right.
And so you can't separate the robot from the software oftentimes. Now, in industrial applications, it's a little bit different.
Mm,
But in the AMRs, they function as a fleet. And so you can't just go buy a used AMR and put it to work, right, without
yeah.
the back end along with it. So I think that's probably one part of the reason too, that that secondary to market hasn't really opened up as of yet.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. It'd be interesting to see how that kind of plays out. And I think you got a right idea about it, what you guys are doing, trying to recycle the parts and salvage parts to use in the future, I guess, for other servicing and other preventative maintenance and things like that. So now if we look towards the future for Roboworx, what does the future look like for Roboworx?
It continue to expand into new types of robots that we're supporting.
Mm,
It's depending on the client needs. As I mentioned earlier, the food service space has been a rapidly growing space for us. So we're looking to always expand into other areas. We closely watch things like the commercial drone space to see how we already have one partner in the commercial drone space, but we may add others at some point as well as that space continues to evolve and grow as the regulations catch up to the technology. We've also developed, and we'll maybe be making an announcement about it shortly, but our own in-house fleet management software
mm,
that allows us to maintain all the records and all the details around the robots, allows us to build maintenance schedules based on life expectancy of certain parts, and give our end customer, our partner, complete visibility into it so they know what robots are being serviced, when they have before and after photos, videos, have a complete visibility to how the robots are being supported in the field. So that's something we'll be announcing very soon that we're excited about. We developed it in-house. It's developed specifically to support robotics. And we think it's something we've been using a lot for quite a while, and in the kind of in the background, but we're gonna announce that publicly here in the near future.
nice. Okay. Looking forward to that for sure. So very interesting to talk to you here today, Dale. And I'm curious as we close out here, for people, and I'm very interested to hear you answer this question because
Okay.
obviously, on the servicing and the maintenance side of things, you see probably a lot of things that potentially go wrong, right? So I'm curious for people that are looking to do their first robotics deployment, what one piece of advice would you give them?
I think, and we've talked about it a lot, it is really focus on the preventative maintenance.
Mm,
That's to me, in Roboworks, that's really the critical piece that oftentimes gets overlooked. It sometimes, like you mentioned earlier, it's just not budgeted for.
mm,
So make sure you're budgeting for it. Make sure you're taking into account the environment that the robots are going to be in. If you're dealing with an environment that is, let's just say, less than ideal, maybe it's chemicals, maybe it's oils, maybe it's other things that in the environment. Maybe it's a lot of fabric dust.
mm,
Maybe it's AMRs that are being used to transport apparel that generates a lot of cotton dust. That's a different environment than robots that are used in a goods of persons for, let's just say, for food. So there's all kinds of, so make sure that you're planning around the environment that the robots are going to go in, and then make sure that you're planning. And if you're an end customer, if you're someone who's looking to put robots into your space, make sure that your partner that you're purchasing the robots from, or doing a RAS model from, whether that's an integrator, an OEM, or a reseller, make sure that they have a good plan in place to support the robots, and to manage those robots, to manage the preventative maintenance around those robots. I think that's the one piece of advice I would give is can't stress it enough how critical that is to maintaining the uptime.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's great advice there too. And as I mentioned, I went through that myself, so I definitely highly recommend making sure to plan for that, so you don't end up with
Plan and budget.
yeah, plan and budget definitely, so you don't end up with like me. I was inventory control manager. You don't end up with me trying to figure out how to get into a shuttle tower trying to clear jam. So
Yeah,
you want the experts to
exactly.
do that, definitely. So great talking to you today, Dale, and really insightful on kind of the maintenance side and the servicing side of robotics, and what goes into that, and what to be aware of with that too as well. So really appreciate you joining me on the show. If people are interested in learning more about Roboworx, what's the best way to do that?
Sure. You can reach us through our website, which is roboworx.io, and it's roboworx.io. You can reach me directly at dale@roboworx.io. And then you can also reach me through LinkedIn. Pretty easy to find.
All right, definitely. And we will definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well as in the show notes. So, Dale, thank you once again for your time on the show today.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Enjoyed this episode? Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast, and for more content from the New Warehouse, find us on LinkedIn and YouTube. Links to subscribe can be found in the show notes, and for everything The New Warehouse, head to thenewwarehouse.com.